horror games. I always have. I don't play them myself, but I watch other people do it. And none of them ever quite impacted me as much as Five Nights at Freddy's. Even though the monsters aren't really scary and neither is the location, the game somehow is. It's very simple, yet it works. Of course, YouTubers like Markiplier showed it to their huge audiences and that really catapulted the game into stardom, but I think there has to be something special about it to even get there. So first, what is FNAF? The game is simple. You are the night guard at a place called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This fictional place is reminiscent of the very much real places that were Chuck E. Cheese's and a Rock-afire explosion. All three of those are special in the way that they have animatronics as an attraction for the children that are supposed to be there. And it turns out the robots move. They don't just move, they are a threat to you. Basically, you sit in one place and check the camera system to see when the robots are approaching you. If they do, it's your job to close the doors to deter them.
If you fail, you die. If you survive, you get to live another night.
Having explained the basics of FNAF, I'm going to focus on horror in video games generally, then the two different kinds of nostalgia, and how this is used in FNAF.
Then I'm going to illustrate how it all works together and finally get to my conclusion. By the end of this essay, I hope to have illustrated how FNAF implemented retro aspects into its gameplay and how this correlated with the horror it created. I will be focusing on the first game and some aspects of the second one.
The love many people have for horror is strange if you take into account that the emotions attached to it are usually negative ones. Noel Carroll defines this as the paradox of horror. His explanation for the paradox has to do with curiosity. We love mystery. In her TED Talk, Dr. Margie Kerr instead explains it with our drive to survive, because the adrenaline high we get from escaping danger is especially appealing if there wasn't any danger to begin with. And to create good horror, there are guidelines. Jamie K. King compiles a list of criteria for video games which aim to create a terrifying atmosphere. These include hinting towards threats, limiting or obscuring the player's vision, avoid showing the monsters for long periods of time, minimalist or mysterious narrative, stressful game mechanics, surprising movement or jump scares. I will be getting back to these points in more detail as soon as I explain the connection of the retro aesthetic to the horror in Five Nights at Freddy's. When trying to reach the past, Svetlana Boym defines two types of nostalgia. The first type is the restorative type. It is to return to and to preserve the past in its most authentic, freshly painted and uncracked, never-aging and never-ending form. It takes the past as an absolute and not as a step towards the present. It also takes itself dead seriously. The second type is the reflective type. This one is freer. It is to mediate on history and the passage of time. It appreciates the past for having been, romanticizes the tear and wear on its remnants, plays with aesthetics and tries to loosely capture feelings. It is aware of the gap between the past and the present. It doesn't have to be serious or accurate. Reflective nostalgia opens the door for all kinds of artwork. It basically takes what was and makes more of it. Now, Svetlana Boym uses these terms in the context of post-communism cultural identity, but I think that it can still be useful in the context of video games and how they handle the past. FNAF built the past it wanted to portray in a reflective way. The first two installments are set in 1993 and 1987 respectively, but their visions of the past are very undefined and limited, literally, spatially. They leave space for each player's individual associations and memories to fill in the gaps, as they do not reveal much of anything. This way, the player is encouraged to put something from themselves into the game, making the experience a lot more intimate and possibly emotional. The game does this by presenting us the concept of a child's dream. A big, colorful pizzeria that is buzzing with life, arcade games, a merry-go-round, spaces to draw and play, and most importantly, the big anthropomorphic robot animals that would play songs and chat with children, but never letting us experience it. The player is confined to a security office at night and unable to move. The only access we do have to the space is the blurry security camera footage. The life that belongs there is withheld from us, creating a strange yearning for the relief of the childlike wonders that we were promised but can never get. This is, I believe, manufactured nostalgia for a place that isn't real and never has been. In an essay about emotional game design, Daniel Cook breaks this phenomenon down into the evocation of personal emotional memories by game stimuli, through which you reimagine that very emotion, now, however, attached to the game because it prompted you. The fuzzy images of colorful decorations could therefore evoke personal memories of friends' birthday parties, making your body try to re-experience that glee, but the visual stimuli show the scene empty and silent, distorting the image in one's head, and stopping you from experiencing the emotion fully, instead reminding you that it is now over and producing uncomfortable longing.
Now, obviously that was just the atmospheric basis for the actual horror that were the animatronics, but honestly, the pure horror of longing for something with no hope for satisfaction ever is frankly bad enough for me already.
With the first two installments being set in the past, the children and teens who did play the game had never experienced this time, and would therefore struggle to accurately imagine what it was like. I believe that this extra hurdle that further removed the game from the real world benefited the surreal feeling that people developed around it. It was ungraspable, different yet familiar, never really reliable. A retro aesthetic in shows or movies will usually be achieved by showing us clothing, slang, and design. However,
FNAF didn't do that. The player was confined to a room with really nothing in there except for technology.
Since the young people of today really can't have an accurate idea of what the 90s and 80s looked like, they will be unable to point out any inaccuracies of the technology shown in the game. Would, however, excuse the bad image quality and noise, the short battery life and unreliability of the doors as natural shortcomings that were simply part of the time.
Therefore, the abundance of technical difficulties as a scare tactic is made believable.
Now to get to the actual connection between the retro aesthetic and the horror of this game, which I've been talking about for so long now. Surroundings. Everything in this room you're in is somehow unappealing. Items are randomly placed, trash lies around, there's dirt on the walls and cobwebs in the corners. It looks old, uncared for, and abandoned. There is a lack of modern or common items we could recognize, nothing that could give the sense of comfort that only familiarity can bring. The blocky computers obviously date this place and remind us, the player, that we are not at home in this time. Their scattered placement makes even the most expensive items in this place look replaceable. So are you. You don't belong in the one room in this place that is supposed to keep you safe. The power system. As explained before, I believe that the fundamental impracticability of the power system is only made believable for the audience because they can scapegoat the time. In a more modern setting, a system like this would be ridiculed as bad writing, but here it works. Everything is draining your limited amount of power, and if it runs out, you're doomed. Every action you take to ensure your safety, using the lights, closing the doors, checking the cameras, is draining your power ridiculously quickly. So the player may waste no time on or off the cameras, resulting in gameplay defined by rapid clicking, fast decision making, and high stress that is easily translated into fear. In the same essay, Daniel Cook explains this as a deliberate way to induce fear via the two-factor theory of emotion. It states that an emotion is made up of two factors. One, a physical reaction, and two, a cognitive label for that reaction. The feeling will only be identified when that label has been placed. However, many emotions share the same physical reactions, which can be exploited. The stressful gameplay prompts the player to show signs of agitation, but the visual stimuli that induce fear make the brain short-circuit and label those feelings as signs of horror instead of stress. This is a clever way of making the player feel more than they otherwise would. Devices and camera system. When it comes to devices, the most glaring thing the past brings is a lack of them. Kevin J. Wetmore Jr. mentions the radical freedom that the inaccessibility of instant knowledge or social media gives the protagonists of Stranger Things, but also talks about the flip side. A simple call for help in the face of danger is simply impossible, making situations that could be solved easily today much more tense. While there has to be some sort of phone or recording device that makes it possible for us to get calls in the office, it is nowhere to be seen. Either it is out of our field of vision, or the night guard in-game can actually not access it, meaning that the player is similarly left to fend for themselves. The devices you are able to use are not reliable either. The kitchen cam is always disabled, preparing you for the inevitable scare of having several cameras black out on you entirely for a few seconds if something moves while you're looking at it, usually sparking a panic reaction. Again, these scare tactics are made possible by the flimsiness of old technology. When opening the camera screen, the player is met with heavy static, obscuring the grey images that are already drenched in darkness further. The thick shadows can be logically blamed on the effort to conserve power. Their prevalence makes the player fear what might be looming inside of them. One might start to look for outlines or reflections on metal, but the camera feed is of such low quality that any details are drowned out. When Chica and Bonnie start moving, they are hidden in black, obscured and alien in the way the shadows fall on their plastic shell. Sometimes they're almost invisible. When Freddy himself starts to pursue the player, this game of hide and seek is pushed to its limits. He is completely obscured. The only visible thing are his glowing eyes. Of course, all of this plays into the basic criteria of limiting the player's vision to spark uncertainty and fear, but it simultaneously ensures that the animatronics remain cloaked and mysterious. The animatronics. The very essence of the game are, of course, the mascots, and therefore a big reason for having the games be set in the 80s and 90s is that these were the times in which such attractions were actually commonly used. They just embody a specific kind of creepiness, the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley is a concept first coined by Masahiro Mori, which aims to explain the eeriness of things that seem almost human but aren't. The graph used to visualize this concept looks like this and incorporates several examples. Now, this term is usually used for the looks of an object in regards to human and not animal design. However, auditive uncanniness may also be achieved, and in an essay which is titled Uncanny Behavior in Video Games, there was a study conducted which compiles a list of criteria which I believe are also applicable to animatronics. Animatronics are naturally very stiff around the face, but their deep-set eyes and their second jaw make them appear especially unnerving. I will be getting more into detail on audio later, but a malfunctioning voice box may do the trick. Of course, expression is hard to get with animatronics, but them opening their mouths fully in certain designs or them removing their masks is, I think, a valid equivalent. Like in real life, the movement of the jaw will rarely be fully synchronized. When we do hear audio, we don't see their faces move at all, which makes it seem like there's something alive behind their shell. However, there's more. Real animatronics move in an uncanny way because the abundance of movement makes them seem alive, yet its rigidness is inhuman. In FNAF, it's exaggerated. In the rare chance we do see the robots move, it will usually be twitching or sudden running, both impossible for robots of that time, making them seem weirdly supernatural and unpredictable. Again, for contrast, with a sci-fi or even modern robot, these things would not have the same effect, as motions like this are simply expected. Their behavior is also unnerving. They seem somewhat intelligent, staring at the cameras and right at you, proving some sort of awareness of their situation and of your presence, yet their way of pursuit is repetitive and almost brainless. One can never be quite sure of how much intelligence there is in these robots, but something about them has to be supernaturally sentient. Nothing else makes sense. And that concept is surreal and unfitting enough to be uncomfortable. The art of audio. FNAF is heavily based on audio, but I will only be talking about the parts that relate back to my overarching topic. Starting with the old camera system, there is a constant humming and glitching sound which is very glaring to listen to. Every camera switch adds a loud buzz, and the rotating back and forth is accompanied by loud whirring. In the face of danger, one would instinctively rather being able to keep an ear out for audio clues. So the noise is not only overwhelming in and of itself, but also adds stress by potentially overpowering important hints towards threats. More interesting, however, are the few instances we are actually able to hear voices. No character except one is ever given a speaking voice, which adds uncertainty to the sounds we do hear. In a small essay from 2009, Mark Nicholas Grimshaw explores the uncanny valley in regards to audio and, again, compiles a list of the traits he finds.
Just pause the video to read them.
One can easily imagine how the animatronics' voice boxes may malfunction in such a way that their emitted audio becomes uncanny. And in fact, they do. There is, for example, a laugh attributed to Freddy. The laugh is eerie and patiently gloating. It's clearly of human origin, but also very obviously not meant to sound like this coming from Freddy. Actually, it's a slow, low-pitched version of another, much rarer sound from the game. A child's laugh. However, it's been defamiliarized to such an extent that it becomes unrecognizable and uncanny. Another such instance is the whispering, commonly known as the "it's me" hallucination. This sound is made up of bits of voices, jumbled, mechanic, distorted, but somehow still human. Impossible to reproduce organically, this sound is defamiliarized in pitch and logic. It presents an uncanny mixture of both human and artificial impressions. The jump scares themselves give off a similar vibe, sounding like crying children as they fade out. An interesting case, however, is the especially unnerving Golden Freddy jump scare, which is a sort of booming static which sounds like it contains agonized yelling, as if someone was trying to scream through the animatronics voice box. This is probably a good moment to mention that the animatronics are possessed by children's souls, bringing me to my next point. 8-bit minigames. Introduced in FNAF 2 and frequently used afterwards, these minigames are thrown in between deaths and sometimes activated through secret puzzles. These minigames are confusing at first because they appear randomly and are so drastically different from the rest of the game. They're kept in an 80s arcade look, and it quickly becomes clear that it's their purpose to tell the hidden lore of FNAF. There are 4 of these simple short games in FNAF 2, and they tell us the story that a man apparently killed several children in the pizzeria, which were then stuffed into the mascots, giving them life. I find these games especially memorable because they deal with such mysterious and gruesome lore in such a minimalistic way. And connecting these topics to something so trivial like an arcade game is almost bizarre and cynical. The limitations of the graphics make the characters look formless and eerie and allow for choices like representing death by having a child's eyes and streams of tears grow until they cover their entire body, almost swallowing them. It's an extremely artistic and abstract way of telling a story, leaving details up for interpretation. But not only are the contents of the minigames mysterious, but so are the questions around them. Who made these games? Who is trying to communicate these secrets to us? Who's playing the game, us or the guard? These minigames are extremely meta, breaking the fourth wall and therefore seeming almost forbidden or larger than life. You just have to start theorizing on how it's all connected, and it's just terrifying and ominous. And it's made worse by its sound design. A bodiless voice which is reminiscent of Sam,
which sounded like this,
spells out help them, save him, in an especially uncanny way, letter by letter. I think this commentator really said it best. It's really interesting to take apart how Scott Cawthon made that magic of his first 2 games, and how it was his creative way of seeing potential for horror in the banal, everyday things that made his games so iconic. Generally, you can say that to build memorable horror, a creator has to find a setting which allows them to implement the criteria like monsters, stressful gameplay mechanics, and visual obscurity in a way that feels natural to the players. The closer connected the challenges that make the game scary are to the setting of the game, the more rounded the experience feels, and the easier it is to imagine the story further in one's head. With anyone being able to create a game these days if they have the know-how, the market is saturated, and consumers look for unique, fresh, and creative concepts. And a children's pizzeria in the 80s or 90s with big robotic mascots just so happened to be exactly that. The credit really does go to Scott for realizing that the most glaring difference between then and now is the technological advancement, and using that to take all the horror boxes. Uncanny monsters, stressful gameplay, visual obscurity? Check. He found a way for it all to make perfect sense. Furthermore, the animatronics are scary not because of their looks or their design, but because of their very concept. They're not bloody, they don't have sharp teeth and claws, they don't look cliché. They are scary for the exact same reasons that they are in real life, just exaggerated. This keeps the horror down to earth and realistic, more like an irrational childhood fear than something that is obviously made to scare you. Interestingly, and I think that's the point, a lot of the horror in Five Nights at Freddy's actually comes from within ourselves. The animatronics, the sound design, the 8-bit games, these are not inherently scary. We made them scary because of our tendency to imagine things worse than anyone could ever write down. And in addition to that, the time made the world feel just so alien that players felt unfamiliar and helpless enough not to question logistics, but not too alien for the players not to relate to the place anymore, making it more personal. All in all, I think it's fascinating how the hidden lore and charm of such a simple game managed to create a huge fandom which is still kicking after 9 years. And I, for one, am excited to see the movie in October. My shift is over. Time to take this guy to repair.